And joining us today is Dr. Myong-hyun from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So it was a day of alarm yesterday after reports that the U.S. think tank has identified 13 undeclared missile bases in North Korea, with some media outlets claiming that Washington had been fooled by Pyongyang. Now, President Donald Trump has tweeted and playing down these concerns, saying that nothing's new. They are all aware of this information. Nothing abnormal is happening. How do you see the situation?
Well, I think, to an extent, President Trump is correct in the sense that this is not a brand new discovery. But then I think the important finding this time by the CSIS is that North Korea has been continuing which build-up of the WMD capabilities, in this case, the missile program. So I think it's a reminder again to the rest of the world that the situation in the Korean Peninsula, it's not full denuclearization, it's actually just freeze. So in that sense, that's the essence of the report. But then what's interesting about this cycle, the media cycle, is that this reminds me of what happened back in October when, in the aftermath of the cancellation of the third visit by Secretary Pompeo to Pyongyang. And then there was a little bit of speculation that there could be a tension coming back to the Korean Peninsula. I think President Trump stamped down such speculation by declaring in public that he was in love with Kim Jong-un. So I see something similar here. There's been an impasse in terms of the negotiation between the two countries. So I think there's a growing voice, especially in Washington, about skepticism about the ultimate prospect of North Korea denuclearizing. And I think this news article by the New York Times is another example of such skepticism prevailing in Washington. And I think President Trump took the action of stepping down speculation about the ultimate status of the negotiation between the two countries. I think he did a good job.
Now, speculation still lingers that this latest report could worsen the prospects for resuming the denuclearization talks between North Korea and the United States. But Trump's latest tweet has moved the roadblock to the side, for now at least. Do you think he's trying to suggest that the talks are back on track or are still on track?
It's still on track. That's definitely his message here. He actually contradicted an article by the New York Times and also contradicted a report by a very important, influential Washington think tank, which oftentimes assumes a very skeptical approach towards North Korea. So it's clearly signaling to Pyongyang that the talks are still viable. But I think it's also important to notice that every time there's this kind of speculation and this speculation dominates the media cycle, President Trump becomes the ultimate decider, so to speak. When he makes the final say, whether this is okay or not okay, we see that the media cycle totally switching the direction. So I think it's actually putting spotlight of, actually putting himself on the spotlight and also signaling to Pyongyang that ultimately he's going to make or break the deal. So North Korea should better come out with a good offer in order to convince him.
So aside from the high-level talks that were postponed last week, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton said that President Trump is ready for a second summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, but didn't give any details so far on the time or location. Now, given that his remark comes a day after these reports, would you say it has any relevance to that, or it's just a matter of coincidence?
So it's actually another incentive to offer to Pyongyang that, in a way, it's a gentle reminder to North Korea that right now there's no progress being made on the denuclearization talk, and it's really up to North Korea to come up with a convincing offer of taking concrete steps towards denuclearization. In this case, coming out with a full disclosure of the North Korea's nuclear assets and infrastructure and weapons. So we are not seeing any progress being made on that front. And so President Trump doesn't really want to be the bad guy here. I think there are plenty of people in Washington who want to be the bad guy and pressure North Korea, very strong messages. So I think, President Trump is sending a signal through John Bolton, that National Security Advisor John Bolton, that he's willing to meet Kim Jong-un and then sign off the deal if North Korea comes out with a good offer.
Now, you did touch upon it, but however, looking at this issue from the other hand, the reports could actually signal that there is skepticism within the U.S. towards North Korea's and its denuclearization. It seems that the U.S. Department is also aware of this. In a briefing, the spokesperson said that the administration sees progress in their relationship with North Korea, but some people like to poo-poo the idea. What's the general view in regards to this within the U.S.?
Well, the majority view in Washington right now is just one of skepticism. And I think we cannot really blame what's going on, the view that most of the foreign policy and national security establishments have towards North Korea, because we have many, many years of North Korea not delivering on its promises. There's one. So Washington has a long memory in that regard. And second is that I think there's a little bit of a window opportunity for North Korea to convince that North Korea materially changed from the past. I think that window opportunity was probably the time that after the Singapore summit back in June. I think there's some expectation that North Korea could deliver a major offer to Washington and convince everybody that North Korea is indeed is actually committed to the denuclearization. I think that window is closing because there's no actual progress being made. And I think that's the reason why the voice of skepticism in Washington is getting stronger and stronger.
So yes, North Korea does in fact have a track record of not keeping the promises. So there are voices within the U.S. calling for more concrete developments or a solid outcome when it comes to the U.S. dealing with North Korea. Should these views become more prevalent, and given that the Democrats have a grip of the House now, do you see like a shift coming in Washington's North Korea policy down the road?
Yes, I think we are definitely lurching rightward in terms of expectation on delivering a workable deal with North Korea, especially with the Democrats dominating the House in the Congress. It will be difficult for Trump administration to come up with a quote-unquote a shoddy deal with North Korea. I think President Trump is now under pressure to deliver actually a materially significant denuclearization deal. So, and the one benchmark for that will be the JCPOA, the deal that President Obama reached with Iran regarding Iran's denuclearization. And that JCPOA deal actually has a lot of details and very specific roadmap about what Iran should do and what the counterparts in the international community should do. So that's the level of detail that I think the U.S. Congress will be asking the U.S. administration to deliver if he wants to reach a deal with North Korea.
Shifting our gears a little, President Moon Jae-in has begun his schedule in Singapore now. During his visit to Europe last month, he drummed up support for his peace drive with North Korea and also highlighted the need to ease sanctions on Pyongyang. What sort of message do you think he's trying to relay this time?
I think President Moon will be consistent in his messaging that the peace has finally arrived, but at least there's some chance for a lasting peace in the Korean Peninsula, and that two Koreas need support from the international community. And I think he'll have a better reception this time in ASEAN than in Europe. As a matter of fact, there are many ASEAN countries that have, I want to have a larger, more extended, expansive economic engagement with North Korea, and the sanctions are clearly it's a roadblock for them to reach that goal. So I think my expectation is that if President Moon sends the same message that he sent in Europe to ASEAN countries, he'll get a better reception.
So President Moon has also squeezed in a number of bilateral meetings in between of his ASEAN and APEC summits. A meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin should be happening shortly. Both sides have recognized the need for easing sanctions on progress towards denuclearization. Do you think issues like these will be on the table for discussion today?
I don't think they're going to talk very specifically about easing sanctions. We have to understand that our most important ally, the United States' position towards North Korea, is one of keeping the sanctions in place until North Korea commits to denuclearization. I don't think President Moon is going to contradict the U.S. position in this regard in front of a Russian president. So, but I think in general, I think there will be a consensus between the two countries that there should be dialogue in the Korean Peninsula, and then there should be a reward for North Korea if North Korea takes the right action.
So something to keep our eyes on there. Now, but despite the standoff between North Korea and the U.S., inter-Korean exchanges seem largely undisrupted for now, at least. In accordance to the joint military agreement, the two Koreas have disarmed the joint security area at the border town of border village of Pyeongyang. They've also been carrying out joint excavations and removing landmines. How do you assess these developments?
Well, this is, it's actually been decided in the three previous inter-Korean summits. Essentially, these are implementation of the measures agreed in the Pyeongyang Declaration and the Pyeongyang Declaration. So this is a continuing pace, and then also because the sanctions that are in place target the economic side of North Korea rather than the military side. I think that there's a general consensus that building confidence between the two countries and lower the level of distrust and tension is actually overall a good thing. So I think that there will be continued support for these kind of actions.
But it's not all areas that have seen the developments. The two Koreas have held meetings on connecting their railway and roads, but no specific plans or details have been reached. They said they will hold a groundbreaking ceremony at the end of the year. There's speculation that the slow progress is due to the standoff between North Korea and the U.S. because there has been a divide over sanctions relief. How do you see this?
That's definitely correct. United Nations sanctions resolution 2397 actually states that transferring or lending any kind of support to North Korea in the areas of transportation is actually banned. So connecting North Korea and South Korea's railways and the road network actually would potentially put South Korea's action in violation of United Nations Security Council resolutions. So this is actually UN sanction, not the US sanction. And I think that's something that the South Korean government is looking carefully into. So there are many potential areas of cooperation that would put South Korea in violation of sanctions. And that's clearly a stumbling block for furthering the inter-Korean engagement. But I think that this is actually a legacy of North Korean provocations throughout past 5 years at least. With the nuclear test and the missile test, North Korea was punished accordingly by the international community. So in order for North Korea to convince the international community to ease the sanctions, North Korea will have to take corresponding measures to stand down in terms of provocations and dismantling their nuclear program.
Then would you say that these developments regarding railway or road connections will have to put off until talks between the U.S. and North Korea are resumed?
I think until talks is one thing, but we have to look at the outcome of such talks. And then the expectation is that North Korea will eventually have to commit to a program of denuclearization. I think we have to wait until that moment to see whether we can lift at least some of the sanctions measures.
Turning our attention to China, China also appears to be strictly controlling the flow of capital into North Korea at the moment. Reports say Chinese authorities are restricting their firms from making transactions with Pyongyang. And this is a change in stance between late September and October. And because it comes at a time when there is a trade spat between China and the U.S., could we say Beijing's shift in position is a show of warming up to Washington?
I think we're reading too much into it, and I think that there's the level of dialogue, communication between China and the United States much more profound than we think it is. On the surface, we see a lot of confrontation and tension, especially on the trade issues. But then deep down, there's also a very in-depth cooperation when it comes to policy matters. And I think what happened in this case is not so much about China trying to kowtow to Washington by doing a favor by enforcing sanctions that they should be enforcing anyways. I think it's more a matter of possibly of U.S. counterparts, government agencies reminding Chinese counterparts and then Chinese firms of the necessity of implementing sanctions against North Korea. At the same time, I think U.S. agencies probably warned the Chinese counterparts and the Chinese companies of the potential consequences, such as secondary boycott against the entities that violate the sanctions. So there was a very similar message was sent to South Korean companies and banks around the same time. So I think it was a concerted campaign by the U.S. government to remind everybody, not just China or South Korea, that individuals and entities should abide by the sanctions. Otherwise, they could risk the potential secondary boycott by the United States government.
Given the slow progress between the U.S. and North Korea at the moment, a lot of attention is put on President Moon's overseas trip. Could we say that his trip will facilitate the talks again, be able to stimulate the talks as we saw in the past?
I think the momentum that President Moon has created for the progress in the talks between United States and North Korea is actually losing steam, so to speak. The reason is because he has tried this so many times, but then there hasn't been a major breakthrough. There's no issue. Clearly, we essentially reached out for all the easiest pickings, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. Developments, the political side, development, the social side, and humanitarian side have all been essentially done. So only important thing that's left are denuclearization measures and the sanctions. So these are actually crucial, critical points that neither side, either North Korea or the United States, want to make a major concession to the other side. So we essentially reached the final stage, so to speak. So it'll be difficult for President Moon, also a third party, to somehow convince the two parties to make progress from the outside the ring, so to speak.
Okay, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you.